Oh,
I do. I have one question.
Actually, I thought about something else. Yeah.
What about using a paper towel to start
About what?
paper towel
Yeah.
and
The roll, the inside of the roll.
no, just the paper towel itself and starting seeds.
Oh,
on
seed
it.
tape.
Seed,
Yeah.
like seed tape.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yay! Yeah, either paper towel. I actually prefer toilet paper because it falls apart faster, which is what we want.
Right. Okay.
If you saw, I haven't gotten to the seed starting yet. That's why I haven't brought that up. This was all transplanting. But now we're going to get to seed starting. And I'm going to have to unfortunately rip that lettuce out again. I hate to do that, but where did I put the pot now?
I thought you. Oh.
Can't remember where I put my. Oh,
Did you take it out of the 6-pack?
Yeah, let's do that later. It was the 6-pack. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need to. Maybe we'll leave it. So talking about seed starting now. This was transplanting first because I knew I was going to have to rip that out and use that soil. We'll just rip it out and sacrifice it. It's either going to live or not. Let's put it in the shade. There, at least we'll give it a chance. It might live. Put all these things in the shade. So, oh, another thing I was going to say, that's why I brought that to show you. When you start things in a wooden container that's fairly small, such as these, these are from a winery, and they are kind of cute, and they do work for seed starting, but you can see I lined that with some plastic. Because when I tried it, first of all, this thing has pretty big slits where all the soil will fall through. That was one of the problems. The other problem is if you have a relatively small wooden container, it'll evaporate. It kind of, the wood acts as a wick too. It'll evaporate the water so fast that you're not going to be able to keep enough water in there unless you line it with plastic. In this case, Lake County in June, even with the plastic liner, I would not use this for seed starting because it's too small to hold enough water. So the minimum size would be, something like that. That is deeper and bigger to hold more water. But I brought it because it's a cute container. Like if you start seeds in January, February,
Yeah. You
this
could do
is
it down.
totally workable solution.
Yeah.
At this time of the year, not anymore already, right? But always line it with plastic. I made a few holes in the plastic so it can drain, but not drain excessively. So just to show you. Now, seed starting. I didn't bring extra seed starting mix, but the difference between potting soil and seed starting mix is usually seed starting mix has more perlite in it. It's that white stuff. Do you all know what perlite is? Where do I have it? I have it somewhere here.
It looks like little styrofoam
Yeah,
balls.
it looks like white styrofoam, but it's actually not styrofoam. You can see up here. It's exploded rock, probably quartz.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, perlite, and also vermiculite is also exploded rock. And it's sort of rock popcorn. It's like popcorn made out of rocks. And the reason why we want that in our seed starting mix is because these little perlite things are holding air. They're like little air pockets. And as you all know, or maybe not, roots need to breathe. They need air. If the soil gets too compacted, if there's not enough air in there, it tends to rot. So little seeds, if they're not germinating right away, they can rot if there's not enough air in the soil. That's why seed starting mixes generally have a lot of perlite in there. You can turn almost every potting soil into a seed starting mix yourself by just adding some perlite. However,
What's vermiculite?
vermiculite is just made out of a different rock.
Really?
Yeah, and vermiculite used to have asbestos in it.
Oh,
Yes, because it was made out of serpentine rock, I guess.
really?
And nowadays, when they sell you a bag of vermiculite, they usually have a little notice there, asbestos free, because people found out that vermiculite contains asbestos. So the asbestos they sell you now supposedly does not contain any the vermiculite they sell you now doesn't
have-
contain any asbestos anymore. But I just buy perlite, then I don't have to think about it. You know what I mean?
But you can get vermiculite that's really fine.
Yeah, and it's
And-
still
and
being
then-
used. I have some here.
And I put it
Where do I
sometimes
have
so
it?
with the
I have all that stuff here. I just can't find it. I have so much stuff in boxes. It's probably in the other box. Anyway, vermiculite looks just like perlite, except it's brownish instead of white.
When I've used it for seed starting, it seems, I don't know, maybe I'm making this up, but it feels like it doesn't, the seeds don't get, because I had trouble with fungus.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't know, it just seems,
As far as the
drier.
function goes, it works just as well. Now,
Okay.
now the problem is if it is really the vermiculite that did contain asbestos, that means it's made out of a rock that's actually not good for most vegetables for different reasons than the asbestos. But in Lake County, serpentine, our state rock, our California state rock serpentine that we have a lot of in Lake County in some places, is not suitable for growing vegetables. As you know, we have a serpentine demonstration garden at the Cooperative Extension Office just to show you the few things you can grow in that type of soil. And the reason is it has a very strange mineral profile. It's very high in magnesium and manganese and some other minerals that most plants just don't like that much of. So it's not the fact that there is asbestos in there that's a problem for the plants. What's a problem for the plants is the strange mineral profile that they don't like.
So would it be
And-
good for good
And
for
there's
some
only-
plants like tomatoes or something?
You cannot
Or would-
grow any vegetables in it,
Oh.
period. But there's
I mean,
some
to add
native
to.
plants that have evolved in this soil,
Okay.
and they're obviously doing fine. If you want to know which ones, we have a list at the office of plants that love this soil because they evolved with it. But none of them is a vegetable. Really.
Yeah.
So, anyway, and that's one reason why I never use vermiculite with vegetables, because I have a feeling it's not a good thing to add. I use perlite. So back to what else is the difference between the soil we use for seed starting versus transplanting into. For seed starting soil, you do not want to have a lot of fertilizer in it, believe it or not. Large amounts of fertilizer actually inhibit the growth of and the germination of seeds. So we usually start seeds either just in a seed starting mix that has zero fertilizer in it, or we start it in just plain soil without added fertilizer. So when you start your seeds, you definitely do not want to start them in something like that has like 3 months worth of fertilizer in it, right? Of course, remember everything has exceptions, right? Pumpkin seeds, most of the squashes have no problem with high nutrients in the soil where they germinate. So everything in the squash family can germinate in very high nutrient environment, no problem. But a lot of other seeds don't like that. So that's why we generally use a seed starting mix that's very low nutrient. Yes.
You mentioned something about hybrid plants that people won't take home. But is a part of these classes that come in to check on, are you working here?
No.
Or you don't work here to do this? So those plants are actually yours and these are like other people's plants. Even
I
though
brought
they're
them from home.
Oh, you gave it to them?
I brought them from home, but I'm leaving them
No,
here
the
if
ones
you
that are
want.
already in.
Oh no, not for. I mean, for
Those
people
we-
here, they
those
want to
we
take them
bought.
home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you want to take some home, you're welcome.
No,
I
no.
don't want to take them home. I have plenty of tomatoes. That's
They were saying something we
Yeah.
could get vegetables here, right?
well, they're not ripe.
That was with the garden blessing. We handed out a bunch of tomatoes and basil and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
But you're welcome to take a couple plants home.
yeah.
So, okay. So starting seeds, you want a low nutrient, for general purpose, a low nutrient soil. Now I did make this half and half with compost. That should not be a problem. But you definitely don't want to add extra fertilizer before you plant your seed. Compost will be okay. The kind of seeds I brought some seeds, mostly the kind you could start still now in Lake County, okay? So I don't want to show you to start a seed that you actually shouldn't start now, because, you know, that image will get ingrained in your head and you will think you should start the seed. So what I brought was cucumbers. I have cucumber seeds here, and I have beans. Beans are great to start now. I have a pumpkin, white boar pumpkin. I have red noodle beans. That's an Asian heat tolerant pole bean. My favorite. It's the only one that thrives in triple digit temperatures. There's the red noodle and the green noodle. They're identical except for the color, and I brought both.
Zucchini
Then I
is okay.
have Armenian cucumbers.
Can we start zucchinis now?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Zucchini you can start now. Chard. Chard is one of the few greens that does fine in the hot weather. Okay? So chard. This is the red vein chard. This is a perpetual chard that's green. And what else do we have here? Oh yeah, the green noodle beans that have black seeds. Then we have some other squash, yellow zucchini. We have lemon cucumbers, gray zucchini. That is the most productive zucchini I've ever grown, the gray zucchini. And a freebie for anybody who wants it. You know, you always get, when you buy seeds from Baker Creek, they always give you a free package of something. And I already have enough hot peppers. That's a hot pepper. Does anybody want it? No. Anyway, I don't need it either. I got plenty. And this is something, parsley you could start now, but only in a shady location. And the thing is, especially this parsley, that's the curled parsley, does not do well in the summer. The flat leaf Italian actually does okay in the summer, but this one doesn't. Just FYI. So, you can start your seeds, again, there's many places you can start your seeds. You can either start them out in 6-packs like that, especially if it's a seed that you want to maybe start in your house to give it a little protection from the elements. You may want to start it in a 6-pack. Or if it's going to be a big plant like a zucchini, I would not start a zucchini in a 6-pack. Why? Because the seed is already so big and the plant starts out so big that it's going to be cramped the moment it germinates. So any type of really big seeds, you have to start in a container that size, like a 4-inch pot. And then you can transplant it directly from there into the ground. Now, about transplanting, I was going to mention that. There's some things that do not like transplanting. That does not mean they cannot be transplanted, but for a beginning gardener to be able to transplant something without at all disturbing the root system can be tricky. So most things like beans don't like to be transplanted. Squash actually doesn't like to be transplanted. So most of these seeds that you start right now actually do not like to be transplanted. They are commonly sold as transplants, but I have found through experimenting in my pumpkin bed that all the pumpkins that I started in a 4-inch pot and then transplanted never developed as bigger root systems as the ones that I started from putting the seed directly into the ground. So when you put the seed directly into the ground of a pumpkin or squash, it develops a bigger, more sturdy root system that will withstand heat and drought much better than something you started in a 4-inch pot and then transplant. You can tell at the end of the season when you take the plant out, it still has most of its roots in a 4-inch pot shape, believe it or not. It's pathetic. I could still discern the 4-inch pot shape in October when I took them out. That seems hard to believe, but it's what happens. It's like that it's like we get conditioned early on in our life to move in certain ways, and plants seem to get conditioned early on in their life, the roots, to move in certain ways. So once they start, circling around and around and around, they seem to have that habit. So if you can start it from seed directly in place, much preferable at this point. But, things like lettuce, obviously, I would not start outside because I'd have to water it 10 times a day to keep that soil moist enough for the lettuce to start. So if I wanted to start a lettuce seed, I would start it, in something like that. And then as soon as it germinates, then it goes out with some shading, of course. The moment you transfer something that you started indoors, outside, you will need to shade it. Even if you started it at a sunny window or under lights, even under lights, it's not the same thing as the intense radiation it gets from the sun here. So in the beginning, you need to shade it. Depending on the location, you plant it for up to 2 weeks and then slowly wean it off of that, you know. And that is hard to do if you're somebody who has a 9-to-5 job, who's not home all day. Pulling the shade back, and I found that when I was still working, it's very difficult to, you know, in the morning when you go, you think, oh, it's not going to need the shading, it's completely foggy. Like when I left the house this morning, it was really foggy. Today I'm not going to need to shade anything. Well, ta-da, 3 hours later, it's boiling hot, right? So you leave your house for work in the morning and you think, well, what should I do? Should I leave the shading on? Should I pull it off? If it's going to be foggy all day and you have the shade on, then it's going to get a fungal disease. If you pull the shade off, or, you know, if you don't leave the shade on and it turns out like that, it's going to fry by the time you get home. So it can be really tricky if you're not around, you know. So what can I say? I actually knew somebody who created an automatic shading system for his pepper bed that automatically opened the shade. It was like a curtain, and it went open at 10:30 in the morning, and then, you know, I'm sorry, it shaded at 10:30 in the morning, and then at 6 o'clock at night it opened up again. I mean, it was amazing. He was an engineer who, in his retirement, had started gardening, right? So, you know, everything was fully automatic, right? But, you know, the average gardener, even me, you know, I'm not into high tech in the garden. It needs to be low tech, right? Because there's more things that can go wrong with high tech, you know. So anyway, now we've established the kind of soil we need. This is regular potting soil. This is not specific seed starting mix. With seed starting mix, like we said, there would be more perlite in there, but you get the idea. So when you start out sowing seeds, depending on how big the seed is, on your handout, on one of your handouts that's called How Deep to Sow, it's this one here, it tells you that in generally, we don't bury seeds any deeper than twice their diameter. That's the general rule. And that's the only thing that most seed packages have wrong. In general, I always tell people, read the instructions on your seed packet so you get to know what that, you know, plant likes. I'm still sticking with that. In general, it's an excellent idea to always read the instructions on your seed packet and keep it. Don't throw it away, keep that so you can refer back to it later. And the only thing that's often wrong on seed packets, more often than not, is the planting depth. Almost every seed packet I ever read says plant a 1/2 inch deep, no matter what it is. I mean, no matter what plant you have, what seed you have, they say plant a 1/2 inch deep. Well, that may be true for some seeds, but for other seeds, that's totally wrong. And the reason is that now it depends on the season also. It depends on a lot of things. First of all, a seed is basically, it's the genetic material plus storage nutrition. You know, in the 2 seed leaves that form the seed, there's nutrition stored for the plant to have enough nutrition to survive the whole germination process to make it to the top of the soil. Now that nutrition is limited, okay? So if you have a tiny little lettuce seed and you bury it a 1/2 inch deep in soil, there's not enough nutrition in that seed to provide that little plant with enough energy to make it to the top of the soil when you bury it that deep. It'll germinate, it'll start growing, and then after a 1/4 inch it'll run out of juice and it'll die right there, right? And you're thinking, oh, those seeds were bad, they didn't sprout. They were not bad, they were just buried too deep. Now when you have a big pumpkin seed like, where do I have it here? You know, like, or even look at this, white boar pumpkin. That's a giant seed. You can easily bury that 1 inch or more, and it has enough nutrition stored in that seed to go up 2 inches if necessary. However, no need. We still bury it only twice its diameter. Of course, then come the sticklers and say, well, diameter, does that mean the long side or the wide side, right? doubt, you know, go between the long and the wide side, right? I don't think, this is not a Swiss watch, you know what I mean? You can use the long side or the wide side. What we're trying to say is just don't bury seeds so deep that they run out of energy before they have reached the surface. Now, when you start a seed, let's say I would have started those in mid-April, when it was still cool and moist and rainy, I don't want to bury them really deep because chances are they're going to rot before they make it to the surface with all the water in the ground, because the ground can be waterlogged. So in rainy weather, in wet soil, you want to err on the side of caution and not bury it very deep at all. However, if it was already triple-digit degrees, and I know I'm going to be gone all day and I can only water it in the morning before I leave, I would bury it as deep as I safely can, because chances are if I don't bury it deep enough, it's going to dry out before it sprouts, right? So now, end of May, I would err on the side of caution, bury it a little on the deep side. Now for that seed, I would say you could bury that 3 times its diameter safely and it will make it to the surface. At least that way it's not going to be completely dried out. Because once a seed has started the germination process, meaning once it was soaked full of water, the germination hormone has been activated, that process cannot be reversed. If it dries out at this point, it will not restart the process all over again, okay? There's no second chance. Once that process has started, it needs to be completed in one run, so to speak, right? So if you plant your seeds and after 2 days, the seed has opened, the little seed root went down. Oh, by the way, a lot of people, beginning gardeners, don't know that. The first thing that comes out of a seed when it germinates is not the stalk to go up. The first thing that comes out of a seed when it opens up is the root. It's always the first thing that grows is the root, to provide immediately water and nutrients for everything that happens afterwards, which is the stalk. So when you see something coming out of a little seed, it's not the stalk. If it accidentally gets unburied as a beginning gardener and you want to bury it again, that little thing that comes out, don't make it stick up. It's the root. It needs to go down, right? And then only once the root has taken a hold, then it sends up a stalk. So anyway, that's just on the side. So now, once you plant that, you water it good. 2 days later, it accidentally dries out. You were gone all day. It was 110 degrees. That's the end of it. You will not recover. Just FYI. It's not going to slip back into its seed and say, okay, let's do it again next week, right? No. So, only got one chance. Seed only got one chance. And it's one of the reasons why often, number one, I plant 2 seeds of everything. Like if I start seeds in here, I plant 2 in every cell. And then after they sprout, a lot of time only one of them sprouts. Of course, the older the seed gets, the lower the germination rate. The germination rate is the percentage of seeds that sprouts. Like let's say you save 100 seeds from your squash, and then the next year there's a good chance that all 100 will sprout. You have 100% germination rate. Then after 5 years, probably 50% will sprout. That means they have a 50% germination rate at this time. Then after 7 years, maybe 10 of them will sprout if you're lucky, right? Depending on how you store them. If you keep it in the freezer, they may still all be good. But if you had them at room temperature, especially fluctuating temperature, then maybe after 10 years, none sprout, you know? So anyway, that's called the germination rate. And things like squash, beans, you know, if they are from last year, have a usually 90 to 100% germination rate, so they will almost all sprout. But I don't grow the same squash or the same beans every year because I don't have enough space. So this year I'm growing this squash, the other year I grow a different squash. So sometimes I pull out seeds from 5 or 6 years ago, you know, that I haven't grown in a particular squash I haven't grown in 5 or 6 years. And after that time, I can assume that the germination rate is not 100%. It's probably closer to 50%. So I need to plant at least 2 in every cell to have a chance that one of them sprouts. And of course, very often, I have 2 sprouting here and none there. You know, and 2 here and none there. But at least, you know, you give yourself a chance. And then the one that, and if you have 2 sprouting in one cell, then you just take your little scissor and cut the one that doesn't look so good. There's always one that looks better than the other. Of course, you always cut the one that doesn't look so good. And that's sometimes very hard to do because they both look so good, right? I know that. But as a gardener, you have to learn to be brutal in that respect because you cannot keep every seedling alive. You know, unless you own 100 acres and have 5 gardeners to work for you, then maybe you can. But I can't. So then when you sow your seed, I'm just gonna not gonna use this. I'm just gonna do it directly in the soil here. If I can get it open. So this is a white boar squash. By the way, I want to tell you a fascinating story. I save seeds every year, and because I save so many, I end up having seeds everywhere, in storage, in my closet, in the refrigerator, in the freezer, you know. I have more seeds than I even know, and every once in a while I find a cache of seeds that I didn't remember I had. So I found a bag full of different pumpkin seeds that was like 10 years old or so. And I thought, oh, they're for sure no good anymore. But I didn't have the heart to throw them in the garbage. I thought, I just can't get myself to throw these living beings in the garbage. I could compost them, but it was early in the year. It was like February, and I thought, I need a cover crop before I'm ready to plant my tomatoes in that bed. I'm just gonna throw that whole bag of pumpkin seeds in there, and hopefully enough of them germinate that it will, you know, provide at least some root matter, some organic matter in there. And even if they don't, then they all can rot in that bed and provide some nutrients. I mean, no harm done, right? Worst case scenario, they're all gonna just rot and feed the bacteria in that bed. So I just mixed them all up and threw that whole gallon bag of mixed pumpkin seeds in that bed, raked it all in, watered it. This was mid-February, right? Guess what? They all sprouted. Almost all of them sprouted. So by like mid-March, I have 100 pumpkins growing in that bed. Of course, I have no idea which one is which, right?
Oh.
And I just couldn't get myself to pull them all out. So by May, they were looking good. You know? And so what I did is I just didn't take the little scissor because they were pretty big at this time, but I took some scissor and I just snapped about 80% of them and left the best and let them grow. And so I had a fantastic bed of pumpkins that was ready to harvest in July. Okay? Can you believe that? Now that is a very unusual occurrence because normally the weather does not cooperate. It was just one of those freaky years where we had no frost at all winter long, and the weather was balmy in March already, and every single one of those pumpkins sprouted, and my pumpkins were all ready for harvest in July. Now that's a freak thing to happen. I would definitely not bank on that, and I would definitely not recommend for anybody to do that. But just to let you know that you never know how many of your seeds are still going to be alive, and so you can do a germination test if you really want to know by putting some seeds in a moist folded over paper towel and see how many of the 10 you can put like 10 or 20 in and see how many sprout, so you can get a germination ratio, and then you know how many to actually have to plant. If only 2 of them sprout, then you know they're mostly dead, but you know, something like that. Anyway, this is just an aside kind of anecdotal story because I was shocked myself. I had not expected, that to happen. So now when I plant it with big seeds like that, of course, in the old gardening books it always said make a furrow, right? And then put your seeds in. Of course, when I have a seed like that, there's no point in making a furrow because squash or pumpkins usually get planted what we call on hills, right? I don't plant them on hills actually, I have them in a raised bed. But I start them out in groups. I will take like 3 of them. There's my little bag. I'll take like 3 seeds. And I'll just stick them in the ground. 3 really close together. And I'll plant them at about twice the depth of the seed circumference, which is the general recommendation. And you know, and then, super important, what's the most important thing now to do?
Put your sign in there.
Put your sign in there, exactly. Because that's the number 1 mistake, you know, even I occasionally make. So, I even brought a pencil. So just so you see how well this writes on here. So I'm just writing the variety, which is white boar. I know that it's a pumpkin, but if you're not sure you will recognize it, then put pumpkin white boar on it, okay? And in this case, these are saved seeds that I've saved for years. I would either write saved on there or I would write the company that I bought it from, right? In this case, it's saved, so I know they were my own seeds. And I stick it in there. And then what I do at home, and that's the one thing I forgot to bring. God, I thought I have everything, but I forgot. I make little cages out of hardware cloth. I basically make a cylinder out of hardware cloth with a top, and I put it over these. And that's because I have a ground squirrel infestation that will eat every freshly sprouted seedling. So basically I put a little cylinder cage over my freshly sprouted seedlings until they start getting hairy. You know how squash makes these hairy leaves? Well, at that point they don't want it anymore. They only want it before it's hairy. So I put that little cage over it, and then when I notice the first hair, then I take the cage off. And then, depending on the weather, like if I would start now and it's already really hot, then I would put shade cloth over it. I just planted a bed of black-eyed peas a couple days ago, and they are under shade cloth until they're like a few inches high. Because otherwise, if I'm gone all day, I cannot keep enough moisture. It's a bed on the southwest side of my garden that's like in the brutal hot sun all day. So if I don't keep a shade cloth on it, I cannot keep enough moisture in there to keep these seedlings going. So I just put shade cloth over it. And then finally, as they get older, of course they create their own shade with their foliage, and then the problem ceases to be a problem. Now, here we have the big seeds. If you have smaller seed, like the Armenian cucumber, right? Here, bury twice the diameter of the seed. In this weather, I might actually make an exception and bury them a little deeper. Just so you know, every rule has exceptions, right? It's like, if you do not put shading on your bed, you're gonna probably need to bury them deeper than twice the diameter of this, otherwise it'll dry out in 3 hours, you know? Now, you don't have to shade the whole bed. I actually years ago built little structures, only like 2 wires this way and 2 wires this way, and I put it over the seed I planted, cucumber, squash, whatever, and just put a little bit of any kind of cloth fabric over it with clothespins, so that actually only that little spot is shaded where I planted, so you don't have to shade the whole bed. You'll become inventive as you do these things, you know. A lot of it is just like at the spur of the moment, oh, you know what, I don't have to shade the whole bed. All it needs is a handkerchief or a bandana over some sort of structure to shade this. But it helps, every little bit helps, you know. Now, if you have tiny seeds, which we would never sow at this time of the year, but let's just say you have parsley seeds. Now, with parsley seeds, I should mention, parsley is one of those things that takes forever to sprout. It's famous for that. I don't know if that saying goes here too, but in Germany we say parsley goes like 3 times to the devil and back before it sprouts. Right? Because I mean, you're sure the seed is dead. You wait and wait and wait, and nothing happens. So you finally said, oh, screw it, I'm gonna plant something else here. And the moment you plant something else, and all of a sudden you have all these parsley seeds coming up, right? So parsley is notorious for that. And because it is notorious for that, what I do, the way I plant parsley, I never plant parsley where I'm planning to keep it and then wait for 3 months till it sprouts. I just throw some parsley under a plant that's already established, rake it in, the seeds, and then I forget about it. And then at some point, 2 months later, it'll sprout. When I have already forgotten about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's that parsley. And then I let it get about that big, and then I transplant it to where I want it. And that's the way to do parsley. That way, you germinate it under the shade of another plant, you know, and you don't have to worry about when it sprouts. You're not like anxiously watching the bed, right? So that's one of those things. And when you have little seeds like that, see the size of the seeds? They're really small, right? They're just like grains of sand. Or lettuce seeds are even smaller. Now, the difference between parsley seeds and lettuce seeds is parsley seeds actually are still being covered with soil. You still, like 99% of all vegetable seeds get covered with soil. They like to germinate in the dark. The only vegetable I can think of that needs light to germinate is lettuce. So lettuce does not want to be covered, which makes it even harder to sprout it in warm weather, because if you don't cover it, it's going to dry out immediately, right? So if you want to start lettuce seeds, even when it's before it's as warm as it is right now, it dries out relatively fast. So what I do is, first of all, this is a nice little nifty thing to sow tiny seeds. You can just make a makeshift cardboard, bend some cardboard where you can sow them. Low tech always works, but if you want to be fancy, you can, you know, put your seeds in there and then dispense them.
Have you ever grown lettuce in between corn and did that not?
You know, I've tried all that, and the problem is you can grow lettuce in the shade of some other plant in hot weather, but it has the consistency of a deflated balloon. You know what a
Yeah.
It has these. It's not what you want in a lettuce. You know, that's the problem. And it's not that you can't do it, but it's not worth the effort. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. So, what you can do with really, I have another one actually here. I can't find it now. I have a much better small seed dispenser, but I can't find it right now. Huh? Yeah, a salt shaker will work fine, or any, as a matter of fact, any spice shaker you can use, you know, with a spice shaker dispenser seed. But right now I'm looking for my vermiculite and my sand. Where did I put that? Oh, perlite and sand. Here. So a great way to sow seeds that are very small. So instead of trying to like press the seed in the ground and then not knowing how much soil you actually use to cover it, which is almost impossible to figure out, right? So what you do is, the tiny seeds, you just put them on the surface of the soil, like these parsley seeds. I can throw them in there. I'm not going to use that because that doesn't like Lake County weather, I found. I'm only going to do the flat leaf again. I love this one because it looks so decorative in food, but it doesn't like it here. So anyway, so you're trying to get your soil as flat as you can. And there is things like, what are they called that plasterers use? Trowels, right? That you can flatten your soil. Now, we're not talking about compacting it, just, you know, sort of get it as even as you can. And then you will put your seed on top. And then you can use some perlite and just cover the whole thing with perlite, a layer of perlite. That way, light will still get in there. So the perlite doesn't keep the light out, but it creates just enough of a cover to keep the seed down, number one, to prevent it from just being blown away. And it's not heavy. so it doesn't crush the little seedling when it tries to germinate, because lettuce seedlings are very, very, very tender things. So the perlite is tender enough to not crush the seedling, but provide a cover and kind of just weigh it down just enough so it doesn't blow away. You could use sand for it. Now this is pretty coarse construction sand. That may not be my first preference, but that would work too. Like sand instead of the perlite to just cover the seed. So when you have like these tiny, tiny seeds, then just, one layer sprinkling of sand is enough to provide a cover. And it works much better than trying. There's no soil that's fine-grained enough that you can get that distance just right. And then when you water your seed in, I like to use, something with a very fine spray. You're trying to imitate gentle rain. Or, where's my spray bottle? Or, if it's a really delicate seed, then even this might be too much. Then you're just gonna spray it. But be careful, even that spray bottle is kind of forceful enough to potentially dislodge the perlite. Okay, so just be careful. And then I just keep my spray bottle next to my seedling tray, and every time I usually have my seedlings over the bathtub in the bathroom. I put a big board over the bathtub, that's my greenhouse, because I have windows on two sides. And then every time I go to the bathroom, I grab that thing and I do a little misting, and it's perfect, It's a room that you frequent, so you cannot forget about it, right? Whereas if I put them somewhere in the garage, then I would guaranteed forget about it. So this, I have another one that's even better that I couldn't find this morning. See, this is a really nice mist. You don't want it any coarser than that, because what happens is, if I tell my husband to water these, I know what he's going to do. He's going to take the hose and go over it, and 80% of the lettuce seeds will immediately wash out of the tub, right? So you have to have the right tools, So, in that case, also, of course, I would label it. I'm not going to label this right now because we already have the white boar label in, but I would label that with parsley moss curled, and maybe the company Lake Valley Seed, right? I found that some companies, for me it was important to put the company name on it in the beginning, because I realized some companies' seeds work better for my garden than others, and at that point I should say that usually the most local seed companies work the best. Even though you might find a seed company from the East Coast that may sell the same variety, but because it has been grown on the East Coast, they have slightly different genetics, even though it has the same name, and it will behave in a slightly different way here, is my experience. So the most locally grown seeds are usually the best, and we don't have a lot of really local seed companies here. The most local one we have is in Willits, that I buy seeds from because I want to support local, and because I find that everything they sell works in my garden, because it's the same climate. I brought a few seed catalogs for you, and I have found that people used to say, oh, it doesn't matter where you get your seed from, seed is seed. It's not true at all. I can't tell you how many seed I've bought that either didn't germinate at all, even though it was seed specifically for this year, nothing germinated. And we're talking expensive seeds. Nowadays, you cannot get a seed packet for under $4 or $5. And if it doesn't germinate, it's not nice, First of all, you've counted on that. Secondly, by the time you realize it's not germinating, you usually can't get it from anybody else anymore at that time. So it's just not a good experience. And then a lot of the times also I have experienced that I bought, especially with squashes, because many seeds you have to separate varieties by 1.5 miles so they don't cross-pollinate, like the different squashes, and not every seed company does that. I can't tell you how many times I bought squash and it turned out to not be the purebred squash that I was looking for, but it was a hybrid, And those things are expensive enough that I want to make sure that I'm really getting what I'm paying for. So, anyway, we can't advertise for seed companies, but let me just tell you that if you have a catalog that does not even give you the variety name of your seed or doesn't tell you anything about it, never buy it from it. You know, any catalog that's mostly geared toward sensational new gimmicks, stay away from it. Of course, everybody has to stay in business and advertise, you know. But a good seed company and a good seed catalog will have the variety. They will have specific growing information. They will tell you where it's grown and on and on and on.
What's the name of the seed company in Willits?
It's called Quail Seed. Yeah. And they have a website. Incidentally, they have a good newsletter also that tells you a little bit about when to put in this seed and when to put in that. Yeah, I like that. I like seed companies that provide information with their seeds and not just sell you the latest gimmick that, you know, a lot of seed companies buy seeds from Europe or from Asia. They have no idea about what they're selling and you can tell, you know, and the stuff doesn't do well. So the one seed company I heard that's on the East Coast that does seem to have a lot of seed that work well here seems to be Johnny's. I know a lot of market gardeners that buy their seeds at Johnny's, even though it's an East Coast company, but they are a very reputable company and they don't sell junk, you know. But still, you have to be aware, read the descriptions to make sure that it's the kind of thing that you think is going to do okay here. One thing I want to say about seeds, when you go in a seed catalog, always choose for Lake County. As far as summer seeds or winter seeds, I do best with short season varieties. And for those of you who don't know what a short season variety is, like here, we have, for instance, carrots in this seed catalog. It says Cosmic Purple 70 days, Starburst Blend 70 days, White Satin 68 days, Bangor 90 days. It tells you how long it takes from the time you sow the seed till harvest. That's what that day number means. And short season varieties basically means the shortest number of days you can find there usually works best for Lake County. And the reason is that in Lake County, we don't have long stretches of the same sort of weather, as you probably all know. It goes up and down quite radically. So any crop that needs 90 days or more and needs sort of the same weather for 90 days does not do well in Lake County because we never have 90 days of the same kind of weather, you know? So the shorter season variety you get, the more your chances are of actually succeeding. Which is not to say that we don't have exceptional years where things, you know, work out ideally, but in general, if you can pick between a 90-day variety and a 65-day variety, you're usually better off with a 65-day variety. That's my experience. You know? Of course, we all fall for the amazing pictures in seed catalogs. You know, oh, that looks so good, I gotta have it. But here it says like 120 days. You know, most likely not gonna work in Lake County. And it's one of those things. Is like in the fall and winter gardening that makes even more of a difference. Because summer, you know, we often have triple digits for 3 months. I mean, that can almost be counted on. Which is not necessarily a good thing, because most of the real growing is done before those triple digits hit. Like, let's say tomatoes, for example, right? Most tomato varieties do not set fruit when it's above 95 degrees. That means for 2 to 3 months out of the year, they're not making any more tomatoes. They are just ripening what's already there. So the real growing and making fruit happens in May and June and beginning of July. And then, second half of July, August, and into September, they're just trying to survive. They're not making more tomatoes. They're just trying to stay alive. And that's why it doesn't help. So I don't consider that growing season. Do you know what I'm saying? 2 months of 110 degrees are not considered growing season because nothing grows when it's 110 degrees. It just tries to survive. The growing season is really when it's between 65 and 85 degrees. That's the growing season. And that is very short in Lake County. And that's why short season varieties do the best. So that's to that. let's see. I should look on my handouts to see if I covered everything. Is there any questions? There's lots more information on there that I did not go into, but you know, we could go on and on. What time do we have? How are we doing outside? It's
Like
12 o'clock. I think we better stop. You get more info from the handouts, and like I said, keeping a record, keeping a diary was one of my main, learning tools. And it's not that something that works this year is going to work next year, like the crazy squash story. This is probably never going to work again, But I have a general idea of what I can do in most years in July and what I cannot. Like through that diary, I found out that I can sow a pepper plant. I can sow pepper seed as late as end of June and still get to eat a pepper before the frost comes. That's what I found out keeping a diary. And that is probably not true for Scotts Valley. It's not true for Cobb. It's only true for my garden. And that's why in order to find out what works in your garden, you have to keep a diary. And anytime you have more questions, you know how to get a hold of us, right? You all wrote the number for the extension office down?
Yes.
And they usually, if it's an ornamental question, Louise will get an email. If it's a vegetable question, I will get an email. and we'll get back to you. Okie dokie, so
Thank you.
help yourself to the starts if you want. I don't need them.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
And seeds too, the seeds are available.